this idea of how do we know what we know?
Yeah.
And, whenever we have that question, I think philosophy took a big part in exploring that. How do we know what we know? And for so much of human history, how do we know what we know? Well, religion, right? God. We go back to these books. And then there was, this kind of shift where there was, this scientific change where we kind of call modernity.
Yeah.
Which, happened with all these big thinkers of philosophy. And you had this, how can we say it, the epistemic switch in the way we think we understand things. And we had this switch from religion to science.
Yeah.
So can you talk about, how philosophy explained what epistemology is and how do we know what we know?
So what you've just said is very, very thought-provoking, because one of the things that I'm very interested in terms of my own research is that transformation from, to use Max Weber's term, the disenchantment of the world that was wrought by the development of modern natural science.
Are you familiar with Alan McFarlane?
No.
He talks a lot about it.
About disenchantment?
Yeah, this anthropologist.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
Right.
So he wrote. So we had him on the podcast, and he wrote this very famous book called English Individualism.
Okay.
And he researched really this change, and also he's a big researcher of modernity and switch. But please go ahead. Yeah.
No, I mean, it's great to know that, because this idea of disenchantment is super interesting, because in a way, what's kind of happening in terms of human society in that modernity moment is that the combination of the desacralization of nature. So it's like, nature isn't this actually Edenic environment. It's an environment that can be totally transformed by human interest, by human activity, etc. Hence the development of industrialized economies. But also it's the desacralization of religion, that we know we don't need God and priests to make sense of nature and to make sense of reality. And I think that's the kind of OMG moment. And when Nietzsche famously proclaims God is dead and we have killed him, this is exactly what he means, is that now what we have, and Nietzsche is not necessarily firmly committed to a type of scientific naturalism where the physicist is the holder of all wisdom, because you can reduce all facts of the world to fundamental facts of physics. It's more the sense that this is the kind of almost emancipation of human beings in ways. And that's fascinating, because it's almost as if the disenchantment of nature involves the re-enchantment of humanity. That we start to think, okay, if God is dead, we're numero uno. We're the apex. We're the apex for culture, for reflexivity. And you get lots of philosophers who are inspired by this development in the kind of secular humanism, people like John Dewey in America, and as well later in America, Richard Rorty, who absolutely insist on this idea of a kind of anthropocentric view of the world. Not necessarily that we are the only interesting thing in the world, but the sources of normativity. So things like moral obligation. Moral obligation doesn't come from God. It doesn't come from the Ten Commandments. It doesn't come from the Quran. The Quran is not this word of God. It's a very beautiful but human artifact. It's something which is a social construct designed to regulate communities, but this is not a bad thing. But it just means that humans are the source of morality. Humans are the source of artistic creativity. There is no external authority impinging on us. And that's kind of a heady thing to have, is that it does give you, to some degree, a lot of confidence. But then, as we were saying earlier, that this is where it gets dangerous.
Yeah, and that is a drastic switch in all of human history. Like, you have
Massive.
this.
Absolutely.
And that completely changes like how we see ourselves and how we operate in the world. All of a sudden, now we are the superior man. We are the ones who understand things. We are the ones who create knowledge,
Yeah.
instead of we're the one who seeks truth, who creates truth. And then the death of God, some people argue that we'll always need God, and then now we have new gods of science and religion, and now the scientific method is the new God.
Mm-hmm.
But I was speaking with a friend about this, that he was explaining that this modernity and switch in how we understand things, creating the superior man, is what led to colonialism. Because he was basically saying that it created this idea of, we have an understanding that is greater, and anyone who doesn't have that yet and doesn't have this modernity way of life, it's our duty to kind of um to kind of take over, like we feel superior. And he was also explaining how that also integrates with how trade was starting and the trade routes, and but yeah, it's just a very significant switch in how we understand things. And many could argue that a lot of the issues that now we're seeing today are to blame by modernity, this thing that was supposed to solve all our problems.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
I mean, that's a really, really elegant and interesting way of phrasing things, because in a way, what you find is when you have, even before the 19th centuries, extraordinary developments in natural science, so evolutionary theory, thermodynamics, electromagnetism. Even before then, you have in 1620 the publication of Francis Bacon's Novum Organum, which is the kind of handbook for the new inductive notion of science. You've got the development of new epistemological empires, because you think, okay, if knowledge really is power, and I can know things, it means I can have control over them. I can determine how they're arranged. And as soon as we think about, as you said, knowledge and power, it's unsurprising that the rapid development of modernity with the scramble for Africa are historically paralleling developments in natural science. That can't just be a coincidence. That can't just be, oh, funny enough, yeah, as the slave trade was developing, we were also really good at science, and vice versa. I think it's because what happened is that our ability to develop increasingly sophisticated analytical categories for making sense of nature meant that if we can make sense of nature, we can make sense of others. And it's the activity where making sense of things had been kind of pathologically transformed from a sense of wonderment, where you go, wow, I'm struck, to use Immanuel Kant's expressions, by the starry heavens above me and the moral law within me. So that kind of, you're trying to work through, and ironic, Kant was a horrible racist, despite having that kind of really beautiful poetic line. The sense of, that kind of wonderment of sense making becomes suddenly, no, what I will do, as you said, is that I will force nature. I will force others to conform to my standards of rationality and the like. And then that's where we lead to in terms of the pathologies of modernity. So, as you said, modernity was supposed to be heralding freedom, but then it resulted in environmental collapse, the degradation of so many people's lives, cultures, territories, bodies, etc. And you're kind of left wondering, well, what do we do now? If modernity ultimately is encapsulated by the Holocaust, say, so Theodor Adorno, that brilliant Frankfurt School Western Marxist, very famously said that after the Holocaust, there could be no poetry. There's no more poetry after Auschwitz. And you can kind of see why that's the case, is that if this ability to develop increasingly sophisticated mechanisms leads to, inexorably, the gas chamber, where not only is genocide committed, but it's industrial. It's the most horrific form of cruelty that human beings can do. Surely something has gone horribly wrong with modernity. It's not that modernity just kind of went off the rails. It's not like we're on the skateboard and we're going, whoa, I've been trying to do an ollie and it hasn't worked out. I need to get back on the board. So no. This has maybe actually always been present in modernity. and then it just got hyper pathologized because of the economic success that they had. So, what Leopold II did in the Congo, what was going on with industrial genocides across territories, even what's going on, for example, say in China with the concentration camps of the Uyghur people. Some things happen that the world has been transfixed by this ability to think of knowledge as power, that it's the power to destroy rather than the power to create and care for. So in a way, this is going back to those discourses about Hegel. Is like, where are we in the history of reason? Because Hegel obviously thought that towards the early 19th century, we're in a good place. By the kind of 1850s, even though Hegel died in 1831, the kind of expectation was everything will be fine. Obviously it wasn't. But we kind of have to still think about, where are we? Why are we going back now to increasing forms of violence? Is this because we're struggling to deal with the unintelligibility of certain things, and the way we render it intelligible is by forcing it into a category to make sense of it, as opposed to taking breath and reevaluating our own conceptual frameworks rather than trying to kind of force anything that's unintelligible to become intelligible, say?
Then perhaps we're being a bit too overly critical about modernity, because I can't remember who said this, but humans don't tend to kill or hate people who they see as like them. It only comes when they see someone else as being subhuman or completely different, or another race almost. And this is just something which has been part of human nature, is to want to subjugate those who are different to you. Because we had the Arab slave trade, which was before modernity. There's been so many atrocities before modernity. Exactly. So perhaps modernity exacerbated it, but underneath it was still there. Like, we can't blame this all on modernity. This
or the horrible of humanness.
The horribleness of humanness, as Alex said.
There's always been that undercurrent, and I totally agree with that, because we don't want to be in a position where, as some critical theorists do, they just say, okay, modernity sucks, Europe sucks, everything sucks in the global north. The global south is this kind of paradise that, before the European colonizers ventured into the Americas and Africa, it was this haven of creativity. And Frantz Fanon has a brilliant put down of that. He said, famine didn't exist in pre-colonial Africa. Like, that never happened. Of course it did. I think you're absolutely right to say that what's happened is that Western European modernity has accelerated certain processes, for sure. But I think what we can do collectively, given as well the increasingly globalized nature of the economy, despite obviously the rise of the neo form of protectionism now that we're seeing, is try and see how each culture has been affected by the normalization of capitalism in its form of life. Because I think what can happen is, and this goes back to part of the discussion we were having earlier, is that if we're able to retain concepts such as love, compassion, care, vulnerability, they serve as a kind of therapeutic check on humans' worst impulses. So in a way, the thing about human beings is that we're capable of terrible things, but also we're capable of doing great things. And I'm reminded of a quote which is similar to what you had said, but slightly different, where it's Nelson Mandela talks about how we're never born hating people. Human beings our primary affective attitude, and I can prove this because I have a 15-month-old toddler. When she was born and I held her in my arms, she smiled. It wasn't wasn't a kind of frown or anger saying like, "What are you doing here? You're a threat to my autonomy. Get out of my face." The natural human response is affection.